I couldn't be happier that I get to kick off speaking to Nayan. Nayan, before I start and introduce you, I want to just let people give a little story. In my position as a regional ambassador for Bordeaux, I just want to share a story that just last week or 2 weeks ago, I did a little pilgrimage to the oldest vines in the Bordeaux region, which quite surprisingly, I would think to most people listening, were actually planted just after the French Revolution, sometime between 1785 and 1805. We're not sure exactly the date, planted by the Duverger family. And they're right in the center of Bordeaux. You're not going to find any other vines near it. They're not at a specific vineyard. They're actually right by McDonald's in Place de la Victoire in the center of Bordeaux. And they are ungrafted. They're grown on a pergola. And there used to be 5 of them in Place de la Victoire until quite recently, about 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. The other ones died. There's only one surviving. And it's an unusual variety, which we don't find elsewhere in Bordeaux, that is from the Pyrenees, that is called Cruchen Negre. And it's a variety which is not, I think you can still find some of it in the Pyrenees, but certainly not anywhere else in Bordeaux. So just a tiny little anecdote to kick us off, to know that even here in Bordeaux, we do have some lovely old vines to preserve. So that will be my role, I hope, to draw attention to those kind of things. So now over to the main event. I couldn't agree more also, Sarah. I think Nayan as well is one of the most exciting and interesting winemakers that are out there today. And I think probably many of you watching, or I hope, have been gripped by his Twitter feed over the last year, as we have seen his adventures in Bolivia during lockdown, getting in and out of the country, how he has coped with electricity shortages, or having to go into quarantine or not quarantine, etc. It's been a wild ride for all of us, Nayan. Well done for living it. Nayan actually came to winemaking a bit later, I think he was in his mid-30s when you went to Australia to study. English born and raised, but studied for 4 years in Australia. And since then has been pretty much the most adventurous globe-trotting winemaker I can think of, and has made wine in Australia, New Zealand, France, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Germany, correct me if I'm wrong. And then today we're going to talk about Bolivia.
Yes.
So let's start off. Over to you, Nayan. It's a brilliant story. Can you tell us what on earth took you to Bolivia after all of those many countries you've been?
Well, the reason I ended up in Bolivia is that I'd actually always wanted to visit Bolivia anyway. One of the reasons I got into winemaking in the first place is that I love to travel. I love to experience cultures. I love to immerse myself. And Bolivia had always been there in the back of my mind as somewhere that I just wanted to go. And at the end of 2019, María José Granier, who is the creator of the Jardín Oculto project, advertised on a Facebook group I run, which is called Traveling Winemakers. It's a place for winemakers around the world to get together, to exchange information, for people to look for winemakers to look for jobs. And she just put this small advert basically saying it was a small family winery working with 3 varieties that I wasn't familiar with, that were ancient vines and were in Bolivia. And I think I responded within 5 minutes of that post going up. And we got chatting, and I ended up flying out there middle of January last year for the first time.
And what I think we can all take from that is the fact that you saw 3 great varieties that you didn't have any experience with did not in any way put you off, and in fact no doubt piqued your interest to think, I want to learn more about this.
Yes, so until that point in time I'd made wine from 54 different grape varieties. Okay. And I'm a bit addicted to working with new varieties and learning what they can do. So, I mean, the 2 varieties in this case which is also País from Chile, or Criolla Chica from Argentina, and something I'd never heard of called Vischoqueña. And I had to take the opportunity and fly out there.
So could you tell us a little bit, I mean, this was a very specific situation with these old vines and rare varieties, but could you tell us a little bit about the wider situation of Bolivian winemaking? It's not something I think that a lot of people immediately associate with Bolivia.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Bolivia, I don't think is on the radar for most people anyway, whether it be wine or not. But the history of Bolivian winemaking is tied up with the rest of South American winemaking. When the Spanish invaded in, I think it was 1493, following on the back of them came the Franciscans and the Jesuits. And as we well know, that they like to drink, so they brought vines with them for the purpose of making sacramental wine. And they traveled throughout South America, planting as they went, essentially to make wine for the church. So I think Bolivia, the harvests, the first plantings in Bolivia were probably dating back to the mid 1550s. So it's pretty much old world.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And following at that point a similar pattern, as you say, to much of South America in terms of its origins.
Yes, yes.
And how about more recently? Tell us about the last, say, 50 years of winemaking in Bolivia.
So last 50 years of winemaking, I mean, Bolivia in a lot of ways is as much as young as New Zealand is in its commercial winemaking. Even though vines have been growing there from the 1550s, most of it, as I said before, most of it went into either sacramental wine or it was distilled into the Bolivian spirit, which is called Singani.
It's a recent story as well. That was also the case in the last couple of decades.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it was only really in the late 60s, early 70s that commercial table winemaking was actually started. And in part, one of the companies that did it was Maria José's family's company, so her grandfather.
Okay. And so this project, her inspiration, what she was trying to achieve with Jardín Oculto, I mean, it is a very beautiful story. Could you tell us about the origins and what it was that kind of gave the flame of inspiration to her in the beginning?
Well, she was introduced to the vineyards in Cinti Valley by a Dutch MW called Kees van Karsten, who was doing some work with the Bolivian government around grapevines and winemaking and commercialization of the table wines of Bolivia.
What variety, sorry, are they using for the table wines? For
the table wines, it's mostly influenced by Argentina and Uruguay. So there's a lot of Malbec, Tannat, Cabernet, Merlot, and Marselan. Marselan's quite popular as well. Yeah, so she was introduced to the vineyards by Kees and was just completely blown away by it, which is exactly the same feeling I had when I first visited. And she basically immediately recognized that this was a heritage that needed to be preserved and it needed to be celebrated. And to do that, it needs to become commercially viable. So essentially wines would have to be produced from those old vines to a good international commercial standard that could stand alone and people would pay a good amount of money for it. Until that point in time, essentially all the grapes from this vineyard had either gone into Singani, in the case of Moscatel, or they'd gone into bulk blends and had just been lost. So you just never saw them at all.
And can I ask, why was there not, so she put this advert on your Facebook group asking for a winemaker. Is there not the resource locally? Are there not winemakers to the standard that that she needed for this project? Why did she need to look outside, I guess is my question.
I think it's always good to get outside input. It's hybridization of ideas, I suppose. I think it's probably the best description. There are some really good winemakers in Bolivia. There's some really good viti people in Bolivia. You can get a little bit in a hole if you just work in one country and one culture. So it's always good to have it. I mean, my opinion is it's always good to have input from the outside.
And I asked that question as well because one of the other aspects to this project that I've really enjoyed reading about and hearing about from you directly is the link that you found and that she has found between rescuing the old vines, but also creating an actual wider societal impact and nurturing, wider things that are actually about the humans living there, the people who are working those vines. Could you talk a bit about that, develop that idea of how it's part of a wider culture than simply the old vines?
Well, I mean, wine is part of culture. Agriculture is part of culture. Agriculture supports and sustains communities. Wine is part of that. I mean, it's only one part of it. At the end of the day, food is much more important than wine, unfortunately. So, and the region where these vines are grown, which is the Cinti Valley, is one of the poorer areas of actually what is quite a poor country. So anything that we can do to help raise interest in that area, raise awareness, put money back into the community, benefits the community as a whole, and also benefits ourselves. It stops people moving away. It means that we have people there to helping the vineyards to prune, to harvest, and hopefully it'll help people have a bit of pride in their region as well. I think that's a really patronizing thing to say, though. Sorry. Yeah.
That's great. And okay, so tell us that you arrived January 2020, is that right? Or 2019, 2020, when you first arrived. What were you looking at? What were the characteristics of the varieties, the kind of viticulture? I know one of the fascinating things is the use of trees, was that something? When does that date back to? And yeah, what did you need to learn when you arrived there?
I needed to learn everything. I had to leave everything I knew at the door and then come in with an open mind, to be quite honest. I had never seen anything like this before. I'd heard that this kind of viticulture had been practiced in the past elsewhere. And actually since then, people have popped up in various parts of the world saying, oh, we've got a little patch of vines growing up trees. And it's something that when I have time, I will look into in greater depth. So the three varieties, as I said, Muscatel, Vischoqueña, and Negra Criolla. They were planted about 200 years ago, maybe more than 200 years ago. We don't have concrete records, unfortunately. And it's, again, something else that we're going to do more investigation on. But there's not a huge amount of proper record keeping that's been done from those days. I'm particularly intrigued as to what happened between the 1500s, 16th century, and about 200 years ago, because there were vines. There were records of something like 1,700 hectares of vines in the Sinti Valley. And then all of a sudden, they seem to have disappeared and have been replaced by what is essentially vines that are co-planted with native trees. The native trees support the growth of the vines. So yeah, something happened.
Were they planted at the same time? Because there must be a question of competition between the vines and the trees. Did they grow up together at the same time?
Actually, no. I mean, that is what is said, but we don't actually know, unfortunately. It's another one of those things. I mean, there's so many things about this project that we just don't know about. We are learning all the time as we go on. I mean, it's one of the things that makes it so exciting, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's quite a bit of agroforestry projects obviously happening in many regions at the moment. And I was just a few days ago at Cheval Blanc, where they're planting trees among the vines here in Bordeaux, where they're actually pulling up individual vines and then putting individual trees in. So now you might find an apricot tree or whatever, various different types of tree among the vines. And something that they're very conscious of is making sure that the vines still are the guys who are in control. They're the boss. So they're planting trees from saplings, and then they will keep cutting them down when they get to a certain height. And the thing that I find so fascinating looking at yours is that's not what's happening at all. These are fully mature, beautiful trees that they look like they're the bosses to me. But how did you work with them both?
So both the trees and the vines need to be pruned. The trees are pruned every few years. The vines are pruned annually. One of the reasons the vines have to be pruned annually is that otherwise we won't be able to reach the fruit, because in some of these vines, the fruit is about 6 meters high, which makes it particularly challenging to harvest. Yes, just don't tell my insurance company. Be invalidated.
Okay, so carry on. So who in a normal life cycle of the vine, so in your from the bud burst into the harvest, what's happening with the kind of symbiosis between tree and vine?
Again, it's something we're still trying to work out. What we have noticed is, so just to backtrack a little, there are two native trees that are co-planted with vines. There's something called which is essentially the Peruvian pink peppercorn, and there's another variety called Chañar. What we have noticed is that the vines planted against the Moye seem to have less disease pressure, I suppose, less pest and disease pressure. And if you crush the leaves of the Moye and smell them, they have this kind of resinous sappiness to it. It's kind of like it's an aroma of terpenes. And I theorize that it is those terpenes that actually help protect the vine.
And are you getting those as characteristics within the wine itself at the end? Is there a transfer of characteristics?
Most definitely, yes. So we don't see it. I mean, we see it to a certain extent in San Roque. We took on a new vineyard this year called Moye Pampa, and the clue's in the name. It's a field of Moye, essentially. And it's quite marked there. We've taken on a third vineyard this year, which is called Los Monrios, which is quince. And actually the grapes come in smelling of quince from there. A wonderful aroma.
Is there a feeling that this method of symbiotic growth between the two is helping the vines to last so long? The fact you've got 200-year-old vines, is it because they're being allowed to climb in the way that vines naturally like to do? And do we think that contributes?
I don't know. I mean, it's something that we've philosophized about, but we have no way of proving. I think allowing the vine to do what it wants to do helps its longevity. Oh, that's what I'd like to think anyway. I mean, one of the main reasons that the vines have survived for such a long time in the Tinti Valley is the fact it is still phylloxera free, unlike the rest of Bolivia. So
is that because of the soil type, or is it because it's so remote?
I think remoteness has a lot to do with it. I mean, we make our wines in a place called Tarija. I'm just going to quickly show you, or try to show you oh, it's not going to work. Hang on, no, that doesn't work. Sorry, I'm not very good at this. So we make our wines in a place called Tarija, which is, as the crow flies, it's about 100 kilometers away. It's about 160 kilometers driving, and it takes nearly 3 hours to get there.
And how are you transporting the grapes from one to the other?
By truck. So we harvest them all up, we load them on a truck, and then we drive them over. One of the things we do, which I was going to talk about later, is that we're a small operation. We don't have much money. We don't have much in the way of resources. So we don't really have any way of cooling the fruit at all prior to processing. So what we do instead is we get the truck to park up on the Altiplano at a elevation of 3,400 meters overnight. So when the fruit gets harvested at about 25 degrees on one day, it arrives into the winery at about 8 degrees the next.
Because it's been naturally cooled down simply by staying up at altitude. Brilliant.
Yeah. Lateral thing. I mean,
that is lateral thinking.
Yeah, it's one of the key skills of a winemaker. To be quite honest, is lateral thinking.
Yeah, and you're right. It's true of a winemaker anywhere in any country, but probably particularly true when you're in a remote environment without a huge budget. You have to think on your feet continually. Are there other vineyard regions in Bolivia? How does this sit, and this style of winemaking, how does it sit within a wider regional context?
Yes, so there are two other major vineyard regions. One which is around Tarija, that has the largest plantings. The table grape plantings from there date back to the 60s with the modernization of winemaking in Bolivia. There's another smaller area around Santa Cruz where it's much hotter and much more tropical in climate. But yeah, the Sintes is where everything started.
Okay. And this idea of arboreal viticulture with the use of these trees, is that something that you are seeing? Have you ever seen it before, or is that really something you've just discovered here?
Never seen it in my life. There's an outfit from Chile called Villalobos, and I know that they have vines growing up trees. And I'd heard about one vineyard in Tuscany before, but that was it. Yeah, it's completely new.
Fantastic.
Or old.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so tell us about the viticulture challenges, or what's made easier by them being in that, the pruning, I guess green harvesting. Does that come in? Are there any of these traditional things that you do during the year?
I'm just trying to think of anything that's easier. I can't, to be quite honest. Everything is more of a challenge because you have to continually work at height. So you need to walk around the vineyard with a ladder. I mean, I have to do it for grape sampling as well, because I have to look at the entire height of the vine to get an idea of the sort of average ripeness of the vineyard. No, there's nothing that's easier. It makes me wonder why I do it.
It sounds incredible. And how about the harvest? Not necessarily the method, but the time of harvest. Are they ready to pick at the same time as the same variety or other Bolivian varieties, in terms of if they'd been grown on a normal trellising system? Do you have any feeling of does it make them ripen quicker, slower, that kind of thing?
Well, there's nothing to compare it to. So there's nothing in the vineyard. I mean, there's no Negra Criolla grown as a normal trellising, for example, in the vineyards.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's I mean, there's a little bit of Vischoqueña grown normally, but not enough to be representative. We don't know. I mean, it's completely heterogeneous, and it's just something we have to embrace. It's, as far as harvest time is concerned, there's a lot of real finger in the air stuff. We literally go around, we look, we taste, we try and do some sampling, but it's a leap of faith, to be quite honest.
And in terms of sorting, when you're bringing the grapes down, does that come into it? Is there an idea of grape sorting? Does that not, you don't worry about that till you get back to the winery, or is that happening? Is it happening in the vines in the field at the time of harvest?
No, we do sort in the field, and so I and a couple of other people, usually María José and her sister, go around and we check on the pickers. We go through their picking cases, and we pull out anything that's we don't want. And then when we take them into the winery, we do another quick sort. Usually, though, at least fingers crossed, for the past 2 years, the fruit health has been actually very, very good. So all we really had to pull out are leaves and twigs and things like that. So.
And I think for all of us who are listening to you talking about this, the value to these vines is so clear, and the emotion that is attached to them is so clear. How are they thought of? What's the value that is attached to them within the local region?
That's a very good question. So one of the briefs that María José gave me when we started working together last year is that she wanted wines that were essentially different from anything in the Bolivian marketplace. The Bolivian wines tend to be very influenced by Argentina, especially. So the reds tend to be very, very robust, very alcoholic, very dark, and very oaky. Mm-hmm. Whites aren't that popular, generally speaking, in South America. Unfortunately, there's not as much attention put upon them as there should be, because there's some amazing white fruit out there. And rosés, forget about it. It's a category that really just doesn't exist at all. So our wines sort of sit outside the norm of what is usually drunk in Bolivia. And we are also going for a sort of a premium price point. I mean, our ex-seller's price is $15 US, for example, which really does put us up there. I mean, I think the lowest price wines in Bolivia are probably about $1.50, to give it some kind of context.
Yeah.
And the average spend is probably about $2.50, $3. So that really does put us up there.
So was that one of your the intentions was for you to help to find a market for these wines?
The intention was just for me to come out and help make the wines last year, but María José and I got along so well, and we just realized we had a shared vision for where we wanted Jardín Oculto to go, and the recognition that we wanted to get for the project. And so I'm now trying to help also with looking at export markets.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions coming in. I want to ask a bit more actually about the taste of the wines, but I'm going to just go through a couple of questions we've got coming in. But particularly interesting, we have here from Christina, an excellent question about, have these varieties been DNA tested, or have the names of the varieties been passed down through the families?
Right.
Because there must be a lot of cross-pollination, you'd think, in the environment that you are in, natural hybrids, etc. So can you tell us about that?
So Muscatel is Muscatel. I mean, we know that it is the most widely distributed variety. Muscatel de Alejandria, especially, is the most widely distributed of varieties around the world, and it's the oldest Muscat variety, of which all other Muscats are offspring. That is a given. There's nothing else it can be. The Negra Criolla, I've talked to a few of my friends around South America and in Tenerife, because it originally comes from Spain, as all these varieties do, and it came via Tenerife, where it's called Listan Prieto, and as I said, it's called País in Chile. We've had it DNA tested, and it is definitely the same as País, but it looks absolutely nothing like the País that my friends work with in Chile. Okay,
this is great, because Tim Atkin had exactly that question. So fantastic that you are answering that right now.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So with the three vineyards we work with, we are seeing a very, very similar morphology of the Negra Criolla amongst those 3 vineyards. So, I mean, the conjecture that essentially there's been some kind of phenological bottleneck at some point in time when these vineyards were planted, so that would be over 200 years ago. That means that the particular clone of Negra Criolla that we have in Cinti Valley is not the same that was popularized in Chile. And even I think even the flavors, the characters. I mean, I'm benchmarking pies from Chile at the moment, and you can sort of see the resemblance of what we grow, but you can also see so many differences as well. With the 3rd variety, and I know Derek had asked pretty much what the hell it was at. It's a variety called Vischoqueña. Local rumor said it was a crossing between Muscatel and Negra Criolla.
Okay, which would make sense.
Which would make sense, except it's not. So we also sent samples of that as well, and he categorically said it's not a crossing between the 2. He also told us it was Vischoqueña, which is very nice of him, but we kind of we knew that. So we don't know what it is at all.
Okay, wow. Are there further studies ongoing?
We don't have the money, I'm afraid. We are a small outfit. We are absolute shoestring. I mean, last year we literally worked with 1 pump and 2 hoses and some borrowed tanks. I mean, until the effects of the pandemic lift and we can actually do some proper sales, we are still going to be working on a shoestring budget.
Yep. Okay. So can we talk about a little bit about the berry size of those 3 varieties? Have you talked about what do they look, particularly the one that you don't know exactly what it is? What does it look like?
Ooh,
leaves, berries, that kind of thing. I've had a few questions about that. We've got a lot of people who are very, very interested in this.
How do you compare it? Okay, so Muscatel is Muscatel. Honestly, it looks like Muscatel I've worked with in Australia, for example. The Negra Criolla essentially looks like a very straggly version of Zinfandel, for want of a better description. So it has that uneven ripeness in the bunch, and it literally is just very, very straggly. The Vischoqueña,
quite classic in old vines anyway.
I suppose, yes. Yeah. Kenya, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it kind of looks like Merlot. It's sort of darkish berries, quite round, not very tight bunches, but I mean, definitely fuller than Negra Criolla.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant.
That's unfortunately that's one of the slides I don't have to show you.
Well, I'm sure we'll be able to send those around because I think people will be very interested to see what they look like. So we'll make sure that we send them around to the attendees.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Sorry.
Are you going back there? What's happening now? I mean, we have this beautiful picture of the vines behind you, but I know that right now you're not in Bolivia. Is this going to be an ongoing project for you, and has your being here and you bringing attention to what's happening? Has it kind of are there more people now who are coming and saying that they want to work with these vineyards?
So yes, I'm definitely going back. I am hoping to actually spend the full year there next year because there is so much to do, there is so much to learn, there is so much background research to be done as well, and I want to be able to spend the life cycle of a year at least in the vineyard to actually see how it works and see what happens. That way we will be able to better work with the growers and help them with their grape growing, I feel. I mean, that's the only way. You can't just drop in and tell them what to do and then leave again.
It's actually a very important question that I don't think I have asked yet. Could you tell us exactly how big is it? What are we talking about? How many trees and vines are there? What kind of size of how many bottles are you making per year? Simple. I should have asked that right at the beginning.
So, okay, I can easily tell you how many bottles we're making a year because it's tiny. Last year we made 5,000. This year we've made 5,000. It's tiny. A lot of the pressure the reason we didn't go above 5,000 this year, again, is because of the pandemic. The sales weren't there last year. There was no point in making any more. We want to expand. Our aim is to basically take on all the old vines that we can find in the Cinti Valley, but we don't know what that number is at all yet. So last night when I was doing some research, I found potentially another 2 little communes in the Cinti Valley that could have old vine plantings, which we'd never even heard of before. So currently we're working, as I said, with 3 areas, which are San Roque, Moyopampa, and Los Membrillos. How many vines they have, we don't know at this point in time. I've done some work trying to work that out, but it's I don't have the resources to be able to do it.
Of course, you're right. You need somebody out there on the vine, on the foot on the ground, going out and counting them, I guess. Are they making a living from it? The people who have these vines or the trees growing. I'm so sorry. I'm hoping that somebody else in my household is going to go and open that door. Hang on a second. Girls, can you go and get? Thank you very much. Sorry. Anyway, what on earth was I just asking you?
Are they making a living out of it?
Thank you so much. Yes. Is this their full-time job? What else are they doing?
Yes, they are making a living out of it. It's not much of a living, and they don't necessarily have enough money to reinvest into the vineyards. And that's something that we are trying to improve upon. So we have, like grower contracts around the world, we stipulate a standard of fruit quality that we expect from the growers. If they meet our parameters, then we will pay them at a premium. So that gives them a bit of motivation to look after the vines that we want to harvest in the way that we want them looked after to produce the quality of fruit that we want to make the wines that we hope to make.
Yep. We have an excellent question from Mike on that topic exactly. So are you finding that they are continuing to work with what's there existing, or are there new plantings happening? Is there mussel selection happening, or are there new plantings of vines? Are there young vines that have been grown in this way that will in the future become this heritage that we're talking about?
No, there's no new plantings of this kind of boreal viticulture at all. And I completely understand that it is hard work. The fruits of their labor, it's actually quite beneficial. So we can pull between 14 and 60, even more kilos of fruit off one vine that's grown up a tree.
Wow, okay, that was actually going to be one of my questions. What kind of yield are we talking about? So actually quite a good yield.
A very good yield. For something that's 200 years old, that's a pretty damn good yield. And if you actually look at the footprint of the vine and the tree, you probably get a higher yield than you would do if you had a normal trellising system of the same varieties.
And why is that?
Dylan would be able to answer this better than me. There's a couple of things. One, the vines have space to spread for their roots. They have space to grow up. There's a lot of light inception as well, and light inception on the wood leads to fruitfulness. So whereas a normal canopy, the wood is sort of shaded, here, there's hardly any shading really of the wood.
Fascinating. And when you get to the top of the tree, what's taking precedence? Is it the tree? Is it the vine? Where are the, what's getting closest to the sunlight?
I think the vine wins every year because it's the most rapidly growing out of the partnership. Yeah, I think that's.
And how about birds? They're right up there now. The grapes. And is there a lot of birds taking the grapes?
No, we don't seem to actually have much of a problem. It's not something I'd actually thought about before. But what we
in my very, very first class at the Institute of Enology here in Bordeaux, Denis de Bourdieu said, you've got to remember that what's actually happening is the vines are there so the birds can pick them, and then that's how they naturally continue their life cycle once it goes through the birds. So that's interesting that you don't have that issue.
So, but what we do have, which I discovered when I sent my drone up last year, is a lot of birds of prey. So I think it's probably those that keep the birds that would eat the fruit at bay.
Okay. So tell us about the practicalities of pruning. How do you go about pruning? How much do you have to lose during the growth cycle, or don't you?
Honestly, this is something I'm afraid I just don't know yet. I wasn't able to be there for pruning last year, and obviously I'm not there for this year. It's some. The main intention at the moment for the growers is to ensure that the fruiting zone is within reach of a person on a ladder. So I think that's the biggest motivator that's there, rather than anything else.
Love it. That's brilliant. Practicality is taking the the lead. Okay, I think something that we all want to know is, how do they taste? What are you finding? What are the alcohol levels? What are the fruit characteristics? What did you discover when you were making the wine?
Last year, I don't think it's a good representation of what we can do with the grapes, thanks to the pandemic, because we just kept going through a cycle of lockdowns and not sure if we could harvest, and then coming out and maybe we could, and then there was storms over the mountains. So I should have said that. So between Tarija and Sinti Valley is at 2,300 meters. I didn't usually even say that, but that's quite high.
Oh, well, you did say it because we were cooling down the grapes, remember, overnight.
Yeah. So the mountain ranges are 3,000, about 3,000 to 400 to 4,000 meters. So the weather is different up there. And last year we had a period of a week where there was storms and it just wasn't safe to dry. So yeah, the harvest dates were a bit skewed last year. Vischoqueña, despite being a red variety, we've decided to make a white wine out of it, and a sparkling white wine at that.
So no skin contact at all? Are you direct
whole
pressing?
Bunch pressing.
Okay,
whole bunch pressing.
Okay.
We, as I said, the intention was to make a sparkling wine last year, but the bottles had to come from Argentina, and because of the pandemic, the borders shut, so the bottles never arrived. So we ended up having to create a white wine from sparkling base, which has actually proved to be incredibly popular, and so much so I actually have had to make it again this year. Muscatel is, again, María José's brief was to make something different. She wanted me to make a Muscatel that didn't taste like Muscatel. And if you've tasted the Muscatel grapes, it's a very difficult thing to do. But we sort of,
they have a very strong character.
Absolutely. You can't mistake it for anything else. But we played around with sort of a cloudy ferment, a really hot ferment, 25 degrees, least contact at post-fermentation, to create something that's sort of rounder, structured, but with lots of savory elements and just that hint of muscat in the back.
And I'm assuming natural yeasts at all point. You're not adding yeast to these things.
So for last year, yes, I did for the whites. For this one, I don't know the vineyard, I don't know the fruit. We can't take any risks. I mean, we're making wines to sell, so I'm not prepared to take any risks at all. With the red, no, that was all natural and yeah, just spontaneous. And again, this year for the red, we've done 3 single vineyards, Negra Criollas this year, and those have been treated exactly the same way. So 5% whole bunch, 2 punch downs a day, all indigenous flora, yeast. Yeah, so, and for the Negra Criolla, we are going for essentially the Bolivian version of a good Pinot Noir. So something that's got good acidity, good structure, brightness and freshness, and no oak as well. Okay,
this is amazing. And I know that you've had some success in selling these in local restaurants in Bolivia. What's been the reaction? Have people responded to this project? And what can we do to help? We're listening. We're all, I'm sure, we all want to go there. But what can we do from where we are to help this project?
I mean, the wines have been very well received. As I said, they look like nothing else in the Bolivian marketplace, and so they are good. And I'm not just saying that myself. This is the feedback that we've had. So I mean, they stand up to the $15 ex-sellers price. I would be very embarrassed if they didn't, quite frankly. I would struggle selling them.
How many wines are there in that market at that price?
Oh, God, that's a very good question. It's not many. It really isn't many at all. I don't know. I haven't done segmentation analysis.
And actually, I guess one other question on the same thing. If those ones at that higher level, are they more oak and international varieties? So I guess what you're doing is something very different. Even at that high level, it's actually the heritage of the country.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not something we bang on about because the wines have to stand up for themselves. So we're not going on the whole bleeding heart route, is that you've got to support this is Bolivian heritage and yada, yada, yada. We want the wines to sell.
Not that would be such a terrible thing.
Oh, no. I mean, it's part of our story. And it's an integral part of Jardín Oculto. We are there to preserve the viticultural heritage of Bolivia. But yeah, we can't just do it.
Yeah, but you're right. The wines themselves people have to want to go back to them and drink them again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have an excellent question from Derek. Actually, Derek, you've been asking lots of great questions. Stainless steel or amphora? And then we have the question is, are there old Spanish amphoras from the past that are available to use or that you are using?
So stainless steel for everything. We did bring in a concrete egg this year. It wasn't my choice, it was Maho's. And yeah, so stainless steel for everything. We want neutral fermentation vessels. We are looking at, when we hopefully construct our winery in the next 2 years, we will probably work with concrete. About 50 kilometers south of the vineyard, there's a concrete plant. So there's a kind of idea of utilizing the terroir of the Sinti Valley to create the concrete vats for fermentation. It's a bit tenuous, but it's a good selling point.
They do it at Ponte Cane. You can do it. You can definitely do it. I can't believe how quickly this time has gone talking to you. I want to make sure that, Sarah, if you have other questions, that you come in and ask them. But could you just let us know, Nayan, from here, what are the future plans? And can you see this form of heritage wine, well, viticulture particularly, becoming something which, you know, is it going to grow? Are there going to be more people trying this, or do you think this really will remain a treasure that we should be protecting?
So where are we going to go next? So we are...
The winery was one thing you were saying. A winery.
Yes, so the winery is one thing. We've been working out of another winery, which has been wonderful. They've been very supportive, but obviously that has limitations, working out of somebody else's home. We want to look for new vineyards in the region. We have an idea of where they might be, and we think there might be much older plantings as well, even 350-year-old plantings. But it's all rumor, and we actually need to spend a significant amount of time on the ground, literally driving around to do that. We want to work better with the growers that we have. We want to help them with their viticulture, not just of these ancient vines, but with all of the vines that they grow, because that will help them. That will increase their income. Hopefully, it will allow them to employ more people as well. All of which will help improve the region. Oh God, there's so many things we want to do. I mean, we're not precious. I mean, we are precious about. We really care about the old vines. But if somebody else can come in and work with these old vines, I think that's a great thing. I mean, anything that raises their profile is wonderful, really. I mean, I think we'll probably have a limit to how much we'll be able to make and sell. So if somebody else can come in as a partner, even a competitor, we're quite happy with that.
Yeah, you mentioned 2 or 3 other places that you have heard of or seen globally that makes arboreal viticulture in this way. Has there been any exchange at that level? Have you reached out, or have they reached out, and any kind of discussion about how on earth they do it?
No, not yet, unfortunately. I just keep running out of time every time.
I'm sure. So we should put a call out from here saying if any other winemakers do grow viticulture in this way, or know of any, that would be a fantastic thing to make that connection.